There's something quietly revolutionary about the person who chooses solitude. You see them everywhere if you know how to look. The one who leaves the party early not because they're tired, but because they've had enough of performing. The colleague who eats lunch alone by choice, reading a book while others cluster around tables sharing gossip and complaints. The friend who declines yet another group invitation, offering a polite excuse that barely conceals their relief at staying home. Society has painted these individuals with broad strokes of concern and misunderstanding. We label them antisocial, depressed, or broken. We assume something traumatic must have happened to make them this way. We offer unsolicited advice about getting out more, meeting new people, learning to socialize properly. But what if we've been looking at this completely backwards? What if the psychology of people who genuinely prefer solitude reveals something profound about human nature that most of us have forgotten? The truth is, those who seek solitude aren't running away from life. They're running towards something most people never discover. They've learned to distinguish between loneliness and aloneness, between isolation born of fear and solitude chosen from wisdom. They understand that being comfortable with yourself is perhaps the rarest skill in a world obsessed with constant connection and external validation. Modern psychology has begun to uncover the fascinating neural architecture behind this preference for solitude. Brain imaging studies reveal that people who genuinely enjoy being alone show distinct patterns of activity in regions associated with introspection, creativity, and emotional regulation. Their default mode network, the brain's background operating system, functions differently from those who crave constant social stimulation. When most people's minds go quiet, they feel restless, anxious, even panicked by the silence. But for those who love solitude, that quiet becomes a sanctuary where their most authentic thoughts can finally surface. Neuroscientists have discovered that these individuals often have heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex during periods of rest. This is the brain region responsible for complex thinking, planning, and self-reflection. While others need external stimulation to feel engaged, people who prefer solitude generate their own internal landscape of ideas, memories, and creative connections. Their minds become self-sustaining ecosystems that require minimal input from the outside world to function optimally. But this isn't about superior intelligence or some genetic advantage. It's about how different nervous systems respond to stimulation. Psychologist Hans Eysenk's research on introversion and extroversion revealed that what we call personality is often just varying levels of arousal tolerance. Some brains need constant input to feel balanced. Others become overwhelmed by too much external stimulation and retreat inward to restore equilibrium. People who love solitude have often learned this about themselves through painful trial and error. They remember the exhaustion that followed large gatherings, the way their energy seemed to drain through invisible holes when surrounded by too many voices, too many expectations. They discovered that their best ideas come not from brainstorming sessions or group discussions, but from long walks alone, quiet mornings before the world wakes up, or evening hours when the day's demands finally release their grip. This preference shapes their entire approach to life. They become connoisseurs of small moments that others overlook, the way sunlight moves across a wall during the afternoon, the sound of rain against windows, the particular silence that settles over a house at midnight. They develop relationships with these experiences that feel as rich and meaningful as any human connection. Not because they're incapable of forming bonds with people, but because they've learned to find sustenance in sources that never disappoint, never demand, never judge. Their social relationships, when they choose to cultivate them, often carry unusual depth and intentionality. Because they don't need constant companionship, they can be selective about the connections they pursue. They gravitate toward people who understand silence, who don't fill every pause with words, who can sit comfortably in shared solitude without feeling compelled to entertain or be entertained. This selectivity often puzzles others who interpret it as standoffishness or superiority. But it's actually a form of energy conservation. People who love solitude have learned that their emotional and mental resources are finite. They budget their social interactions the way others budget money, spending carefully on relationships and experiences that truly nourish them, rather than depleting their reserves on shallow connections that leave them feeling empty. The digital age has created fascinating new dynamics for these individuals. Social media promises connection without the energy drain of physical presence, but many who prefer solitude find themselves even more exhausted by online interactions. The constant performance required by digital platforms, the need to curate an acceptable version of themselves for public consumption, feels antithetical to their natural inclination toward authenticity and privacy. They often retreat from these spaces, not out of technological incompetence, but from a deep understanding that true connection cannot be manufactured through screens and algorithms. Their relationship with silence reveals perhaps the most striking aspect of their psychology. While most people experience quiet as an absence, something missing, something wrong, those who love solitude experience silence as presence. It becomes a companion, a teacher, a source of information about themselves and the world around them. They learn to read the different qualities of silence the way others read facial expressions. The anticipatory quiet before dawn carries different information than the settling silence of late evening. The hollow silence of an empty house speaks differently than the full silence of a forest. This intimate relationship with solitude often leads to what psychologists call increased interoceptive awareness. They become finely attuned to their internal states, their physical sensations, their emotional fluctuations. They notice when their energy shifts, when their thoughts change direction, when their body needs rest or movement. This self-knowledge creates a feedback loop that further reinforces their preference for alone time, because they learn to trust their internal compass more than external advice or social pressure. The creative implications of this psychology are profound. Research consistently shows that breakthrough insights and original ideas emerge during periods of unfocused attention, when the mind is allowed to wander without external direction. People who love solitude naturally create these conditions for themselves. They understand that creativity isn't a social activity that can be forced through collaboration or scheduled in brainstorming sessions. It's an intimate process that requires space, time, and freedom from the pressure to perform or explain. Their homes often reflect this understanding, becoming carefully crafted environments designed to support their internal life. Not necessarily luxurious or expensive, but intentionally arranged to promote the kind of thinking and feeling they value. Books are positioned within easy reach. Lighting is soft and adjustable. Spaces are cleared of clutter that might distract from the subtle thoughts trying to emerge. These aren't displays for others to admire, but functional tools for sustaining the rich inner life that defines them. The seasonal rhythms of solitude lovers often differ from the social calendar that governs most people's lives. They might feel most alive during the quiet months of winter, when others complain of isolation and depression. They find energy in the early morning hours before the world demands their attention, or in the late evening when day's obligations finally release their grip. Their natural rhythms align with solitude rather than fighting against it. This creates a curious relationship with time itself. Without the constant social scheduling that fills most people's calendars, they develop a more intuitive sense of timing. They learn to work with their natural energy cycles, rather than forcing productivity according to external expectations. They might write for hours when inspiration strikes, regardless of whether it's a designated work time, or they might spend entire days in gentle, unstructured reflection when their inner world needs tending. Understanding the psychology of people who love solitude isn't just academic curiosity. It's a window into alternative ways of being human that our hyper-connected culture desperately needs to remember. These individuals have developed what researchers call autonomous self-regulation, the ability to direct their own attention and energy without constant external validation or guidance. While most people need feedback from others to know if they're on the right track, those who prefer solitude have cultivated an internal compass that guides their decisions. They've learned to distinguish between what they actually want and what others expect them to want, between genuine desires and socially conditioned responses. This autonomy often manifests in unconventional life choices that baffle friends and family. They might choose careers that allow for independent work rather than climbing traditional hierarchies that require constant networking. They select living situations based on personal comfort rather than social prestige. They make financial decisions that prioritize freedom and flexibility over impressive appearances. To observers, these choices might seem self-limiting or antisocial, but they reflect a deep understanding of what actually generates satisfaction versus what merely looks successful. The psychological benefits of this approach compound over time. Research from Stanford University shows that people who spend regular time in solitude develop enhanced emotional regulation skills. They become less reactive to external stresses because they've learned to process experiences internally before responding. Their emotional responses become more considered, less automatic. They develop what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle variations in their inner states. But perhaps the most striking aspect of their psychology is how they relate to boredom. While most people experience boredom as a problem to be solved immediately through entertainment or stimulation, those who love solitude have developed a completely different relationship with unstimulating moments. They understand that boredom is often the precursor to insight, that the mind needs periods of apparent emptiness to reorganize and generate new connections. Neuroscience supports this intuitive understanding. Studies using fMRI technology show that during periods of boredom, the brain's default mode network becomes highly active, forming new neural pathways and consolidating memories in ways that don't happen during focused attention. People who can tolerate and even embrace these unstimulating periods essentially give their brains permission to perform essential maintenance work that constant entertainment prevents. This comfort with mental downtime creates a ripple effect throughout their psychological landscape. They become less dependent on external entertainment, less susceptible to the anxiety that drives compulsive behavior, less likely to make impulsive decisions to escape uncomfortable feelings. They develop what meditation teachers call equanimity, the ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. Their relationship with technology reflects this deeper psychological orientation. While others scroll through social media to fill empty moments, those who prefer solitude often use technology more intentionally, as a tool rather than an escape. They might research topics that genuinely interest them, engage in meaningful correspondence with distant friends, or use digital platforms to explore creative projects. But they rarely use technology to avoid being alone with their thoughts. This intentional relationship with stimulation extends to their consumption habits more broadly. They tend to be selective about the media they consume, the information they absorb, the experiences they pursue, not from a sense of superiority, but from an understanding that their internal environment is precious and worth protecting. They recognize that everything they consume mentally and emotionally affects the quality of their inner life, so they choose inputs that nourish, rather than deplete their psychological resources. The social misunderstanding surrounding these individuals often stems from cultural assumptions about happiness and fulfillment. Western society has largely equated well-being with social connection, activity, and external achievement. The person who finds deep satisfaction in solitary pursuits challenges these assumptions in ways that make others uncomfortable. Their contentment without constant social validation suggests alternative paths to fulfillment that many people have never seriously considered. This discomfort manifests in various forms of social pressure. Well-meaning friends and family members frequently express concern about their social isolation, offer invitations designed to draw them out, or suggest professional help for what they perceive as unhealthy withdrawal. The underlying message is often that preferring solitude indicates something wrong that needs fixing rather than a legitimate psychological orientation that deserves respect. What makes this particularly complex is that some people do use solitude as an escape from unresolved trauma or social anxiety. The challenge lies in distinguishing between healthy solitude chosen from a position of strength and isolation born from fear or pain. Mental health professionals are increasingly recognizing this distinction, understanding that not all preference for aloneness indicates pathology. Those who genuinely thrive in solitude typically maintain the capacity for meaningful connection when they choose it. They don't avoid social interaction out of fear or inadequacy, but select it thoughtfully based on their energy levels and genuine interest. They can engage deeply with others when the situation calls for it, but they don't require constant social contact to feel complete or worthwhile. Their approach to problem-solving often reflects this same independence and internal focus. Rather than immediately seeking advice or validation from others when facing difficulties, they tend to spend time alone processing the situation, exploring different perspectives internally, and developing their own understanding before seeking external input. This doesn't mean they never ask for help, but they approach support seeking more strategically and less compulsively than those who need constant reassurance. The career paths chosen by people who love solitude often reflect these psychological patterns. They gravitate toward work that allows for extended periods of focused attention, creative exploration, and minimal interpersonal drama. They might become writers, researchers, artists, programmers, or independent consultants. Not because they lack social skills, but because they perform best when their environment aligns with their natural psychological rhythms. This alignment between inner nature and outer circumstances creates a feedback loop that reinforces their preference for solitude. As they experience success and satisfaction in solo endeavours, they become more confident in their unconventional choices and less influenced by social pressure to conform to extroverted ideals. Their understanding of personal boundaries becomes remarkably sophisticated. Through years of navigating a world that constantly questions their choices, they learn to communicate their needs without defensiveness, to explain their preferences without apologising for them. They develop what psychologists call assertive detachment, the ability to maintain their position while remaining kind and understanding toward those who don't share their perspective. This boundary setting extends beyond social situations into every aspect of their lives. They become skilled at recognizing when external demands are draining their essential energy reserves. They notice the subtle signs of overstimulation before reaching the point of exhaustion. They learn to say no to commitments that don't align with their values or energy levels, even when saying yes would be easier or more socially acceptable. The relationship between solitude lovers and perfectionism reveals another fascinating psychological dimension. Many discover that their preference for alone time stems partly from perfectionist tendencies that make social interaction feel effortful and draining. In solitude, they don't need to manage how others perceive them or worry about making social mistakes. They can exist without performance anxiety, without the constant self-monitoring that social situations often require. But this isn't always healthy perfectionism. Some individuals use solitude as a way to avoid the messiness and unpredictability of human connection. They retreat not from strength, but from fear of judgment, rejection, or inadequacy. The key distinction lies in whether their solitude feels expansive or constrictive, whether it opens possibilities or closes them off. Those whose solitude springs from genuine preference rather than avoidance typically maintain what researchers call secure attachment to themselves. They've developed an internal relationship that provides the safety and acceptance they might seek from others. This self-relationship becomes a foundation that makes external relationships optional rather than desperate necessities. Their sleep patterns often reflect their psychological orientation toward quietude and introspection. While many people struggle with the transition to sleep because their minds race with unprocessed thoughts from the day, solitude lovers frequently find bedtime peaceful and restorative. They've spent enough time alone with their thoughts during waking hours that sleep doesn't feel like a threatening loss of control or consciousness. Dreams often carry special significance for these individuals. Without the constant input of social interaction to process, their unconscious minds have more space to work with internal material. They might remember dreams more vividly, find meaning in symbolic imagery, or use dream content as a source of creative inspiration. Their relationship with their unconscious becomes more collaborative and less fearful. The aging process presents unique opportunities and challenges for people who prefer solitude. As social circles naturally contract through life changes, job transitions, and geographical moves, those comfortable with aloneness often age more gracefully than their socially dependent counterparts. They don't experience the same level of distress when friendships fade or family members become unavailable. Their emotional well-being remains stable because it doesn't depend on external social structures that inevitably shift over time. However, they must guard against becoming too isolated as they age. The line between healthy solitude and problematic withdrawal can blur when physical limitations or life circumstances reduce their ability to engage socially when they choose to. Maintaining the capacity for connection, even if used sparingly, becomes crucial for psychological health in later years. Their relationship with money and material possessions often reflects their internal focus and independence. They tend to spend thoughtfully rather than impulsively, prioritizing purchases that support their preferred lifestyle over those that impress others. They might invest in quality books, comfortable furniture, or tools that enhance their solo activities rather than status symbols designed for social display. This financial approach often leads to greater long-term security because their happiness doesn't depend on keeping up with social expectations or maintaining expensive social lifestyles. They can find satisfaction in simple pleasures that cost little but provide rich experiences: library books instead of bookstore purchases, home-cooked meals instead of restaurant dining, nature walks instead of expensive entertainment. The spiritual dimensions of solitude often become important to these individuals. Though not necessarily in traditional religious contexts, they develop what might be called a contemplative orientation toward existence. finding meaning and connection through direct experience rather than communal worship or shared belief systems. They might practice meditation, spend time in nature, or engage in philosophical reflection as ways of touching something larger than themselves. This spiritual independence mirrors their psychological autonomy. They don't need external authorities to validate their experiences or interpret their meaning. They become comfortable with uncertainty, with questions that have no clear answers, with mysteries that resist explanation. This comfort with not knowing allows them to engage with life's deepest questions without the anxiety that drives many people toward premature conclusions or rigid belief systems. Their contribution to society often happens quietly and indirectly. They become the thinkers, creators, and innovators whose work enriches culture even when their names remain unknown. They write books that touch readers they'll never meet, develop ideas that influence fields they're not part of, create art that moves people they'll never encounter. Their impact spreads through their work rather than their personal presence. Understanding these individuals requires recognizing that human psychology contains multitudes, that there's no single template for a well-lived life. Their preference for solitude isn't a deficit to be corrected, but a legitimate way of engaging with existence that offers its own gifts and insights. In a world that often feels overwhelming in its complexity and demands, they represent an alternative approach that prioritizes depth over breadth, quality over quantity, internal richness over external achievement. Their very existence challenges cultural assumptions about human nature and social needs, suggesting that the path to fulfillment might be more varied and individual than mainstream psychology has traditionally acknowledged. They remind us that sometimes the most profound connections happen not between people, but between individuals and the deeper currents of life itself. Perhaps the most radical truth about people who choose solitude is that they're not broken pieces waiting to be fixed. They're complete systems operating according to different principles, like musicians playing in a key the rest of the world hasn't learned to hear. Their psychology reveals that human flourishing isn't a one-size-fits-all equation, requiring constant social input and external validation. In our hyper-connected age, these individuals serve as living reminders that sometimes the deepest growth happens in silence, that creativity emerges from stillness, and that the most authentic version of yourself can only be discovered when you stop performing for others. They've mastered perhaps the most difficult skill of modern life, being genuinely comfortable with who they are when no one else is watching. If you recognize yourself in this description, know that your preference for solitude isn't something to apologize for or overcome. It's a legitimate way of moving through the world that deserves the same respect we give to more socially oriented approaches. And if you're someone who struggles to understand the solitude lovers in your life, perhaps this glimpse into their inner world can help you see their choices not as rejections of connection, but as embraces of a different kind of richness altogether. The next time you encounter someone who chooses to be alone, remember that they might not be hiding from life. They might be diving deeper into it than most people ever dare to go.